How's it going, everyone? This is Fire Ghast, and we are doing an Ask Ghast that I posted around last week. Usually when I do these, I just answer the questions off the top of my head, but this time I wanted to keep it a little more organized and try to make it more of a video. So I actually just wrote down all of my answers for about 10 or so questions, and I'm just going to see how this version of the Ask Ghast works, because a lot of these questions were pretty interesting and I wanted to kind of give a more organized thought process on my answers, so that's what we're going to do today. Thank you so much for asking your questions. There was so many great ones. I'm excited to get through as many as I can, so if you do like these kind of videos to play in the background as I answer some Fire Emblem related questions, please make sure you leave a like on the video and comment down below your thoughts on any one of my answers, in case you were the one who asked it, or if you resonated or disagreed or agreed with a certain question that I answered. Without further ado, let's get started on number 1. What would it be the next Fire Emblem game you want to see? Either a new game, remake, or something else you might think about, like a crossover. If I had one day to live and I could experience a next Fire Emblem game of my choosing, I'd probably want an FE7 remake. I go back and forth a lot on this, and we're probably gonna get an FE4 remake based on everything that's been implied with that Engage leak that was like half true, Phase and Engage's attention to FE4 stuff, and it chronologically being the next in the series to be remade. If it's something unrelated to SRPGs and we're talking straight up crossover, I'd like a Fire Emblem fighting game. That would be awesome. Do you think people will still look fondly on Engage when the next couple FEs come out? Right now, the modding scene is pretty active, but active discussion for the game is at a low. I think the only thing people will seriously look back on in Engage was the gameplay and the unique mechanics of it. I don't know how or why the Emblem mechanic would make a return in another entry, but designing the gameplay heavily around that was an overall great experience. Engage will, to me, be one of, if not the best gameplay experience in the series to date. So much customizability and action-packed into the player phase made it feel like an action turn-based RPG if one was ever to exist. Thoughts on Eirika? Eirika is great. I think she has understandable flaws and makes honest and understandable mistakes. She gets flack for her choice to give Leon the stone, but never had a problem with the choice with the circumstances. Her supports are decent too. I've not taken a deep dive into her character, but maybe I will with the FE8 remake when I become 40 years old. Is Jeigan, your car, still alive? Yes, it's still running strong after the repairs being done, but I haven't driven Jeigan in a while. Do you think another game in the franchise deserves a sequel, like what Book 2 was for Marth's games? And do you think animal units should return like Laguz? To be honest, I think it would be crazy and impossible if they made a sequel to 3 Houses based off the roots. Like 3 new routes based off the 3 routes from the first game, like whichever the ones Byleth picked. Time skip it like 20 to 30 years, and given that Byleth doesn't age anyway, now we're dealing with mega time skipped versions of the old heroes, now with kids, and Byleth leads like a second generation against some new world threat. This of course means that there are canon relationships, but whatever. Hell, maybe involve Shez and Arval somehow. Sequels are hard to give attention to because a lot of games ended with no real strings attached anymore. Other games can have potential sequel scenarios though. You could have a successor to FE8 that takes place in Grotto after the earthquake, maybe it falls to complete disarray and some new evil takes shape over the country, and it's like a side story exclusive to Grotto, like Thracia was with Thracia. The political climate of Yggdrasil could always have a shakeup too. Even though Seliph won, it's not like the Loptrians will suddenly have the green light to not be persecuted anymore. There was so much left on the table with FE4's story that it'd be cool if that somehow got re-explored. As for Laguz, yeah, I've always thought they're boring as hell. They need to have a lot more than just melee attacks, but I think in Radiant Dawn their skills were pretty cool from what I remember. Thoughts on Alear's design from first revealed to present day. Edit, what do you think of the promotion design? Alear's design hasn't really aged well for me. Well, I'm actually more indifferent than anything. I thought it wasn't good then, and I haven't really budged on that. The official art is great because Picasso is a great artist, but it's still so much noise and over-design, and the justification for their hair is tacky and cliche and corny. Promotion design is all that, but they're promoted now, and there's not really much else to say in my opinion. Favorite Fire Emblem Lord? I will always struggle to answer this because it's like, how do you really choose? But I'll just say Hector for sentimental reasons, but I just need to stop myself there because I can just go in detail about like 4 to 5 other lords. What FE characters do you think have been done the dirtiest by intelligence systems? Eliwood, absolutely. So easy. That's literally the easiest answer I could go for. He's literally the lord of the first Fire Emblem game, and he is like not in Engage, was treated like garbage in Heroes. It's like they try to forget he exists. It's really it's really sad. Most unique classes in Fire Emblem: design, combat, prowess, everything. Had a hard time answering this one, but I would say Dancers and Thieves for utility, Dreadfighters for being badass and iconic, Hector and Lynn's promoted classes for their iconic animations, Zane's completely insane ability to copy another unit, Tricksters and Three Houses for foul play being like a really cool movement option, and Engage's DLC classes were also pretty cool. What do you think about the sentiment of separating the story and gameplay in regards to Engage? Is it an accurate and fair assessment of the quality of both halves, or is that unjustifiable for people looking for an experience which is the sum of all of its parts? Had a hard time answering this question because I'm not sure what the question is asking exactly. If you're looking for the complete package of story, characters, and gameplay, I don't think Engage will satisfy that. But if you're a gameplay-centric player, then Engage will 1000% deliver on that front. It is an incredible gameplay experience, but it kind of depends on what the player values. If they're looking for the best gameplay experience on the Switch, I'd say go for Engage. If they're looking for the more complete Fire Emblem package, I would say Three Houses. How fun and cool would you think it would be if they made a Fire Emblem PvP or do a tournament with players' armies against each other? Do you think it would be a good idea, yes or no? If yes, how do you think it would work? Fire Emblem PvP can work. Shadow Dragon PvP had pretty good rules in place from what I've read and what I've seen. It was just rampant with cheaters. Summoner Duels PvP was also really fun at the beginning, and I really grinded that mode and tried my best to be as good as I can, especially in Book 2 prior. But that game is completely off the rails and unfun at this point, and Summoner Duels was affected incredibly badly by pay to win and power creep and these insane skills that, I mean, how do you even have time to read all that shit? Honestly, I'd prefer PvE content that was multiplayer, like real-time control of select units, but you play with other players taking down maps and bosses. I really hope one day Fire Emblem does something like that. If there is a remake of Genealogy on the way, do you want it to stay as faithful as possible to the original, or do you want the mechanics to get updated/reworked for newer audiences? I took some detail with this question because this is actually something that I want to get into in a separate video altogether. So I wrote, my issue is twofold with this one. Genealogy is a very weirdly polarizing gameplay experience. There's a ton of downtime between castle sieges which pad out chapters like crazy, but when you do get into the nitty-gritty of the gameplay and you're pushing your player face with a bunch of Super Kanto strategies, that's where it gets fun. Then you have the story, which honestly I think they should keep mostly the same while adding depth to characters like how Echoes did it. I would also not mind them fleshing out antagonist characters too. I also think that it could benefit from having Thracia 776 characters come in because you could easily justify a ton of those characters coming in and contributing in some capacity to FE4, like Sias, Avil. I'm kind of biased in that regard, but you know what I mean. It would be a huge undertaking to do everything well, so I wanted to stay faithful in some ways and others taking some liberties. I've been thinking about making a video about this like I said, and what a remake would look like and the challenges it would have. What in Fire Emblem have you completely changed your opinion on over the years? It can be a game, character, class, mechanic, or something else, as long as your thoughts have done a complete 180. To keep it simple and recent, for characters I would say Hortensia and Chris. Hortensia because I thought I was going to hate her from the onset of her trailer information, design, and voice, but she is one of the more fleshed out characters in Engage, and Chris because when I played FE12 Lunatic, I got to chapter 8X and haven't picked it back up yet, I realized just how godlike of a unit he is. It's that and FE12 in general that I've turned around on. FE3, Book 2, and FE12 are genuinely different experiences. Should the next Fire Emblem have online multiplayer/co-op? It'd be really fun going through a map and taking out a boss with a friend. For example, they might control physical units while I would control mages and healers. I agree. Like I mentioned earlier, a co-op would be much more fun than PvP in my opinion. Engage had relay battles, but those were not thought out well. I remember it hard to actually get 5 friends to complete a map, and 5 friends at the same time is a lot. I don't even know if anyone really played that mode for the long term. Which continent do you wish to revisit for another game? I'm gonna say Alib. How do you feel about character designs for Engage? If you like some, or if you think some of the designs are a bit too extra in trying to make a character stand out. Engage character designs are a really mixed bag. Some I think are really good, and others are really bad. Some have the perfect amount of like Fire Emblem camp, and others have really bad camp. I believe I made a video about this or something, at least I think I did. And I kind of talked about character design for this game and how I felt about it. You're kind of right. Some of them I do like and some that were really too extra and way too much noise. Hi, are you gassed? No. Would you prefer when Fire Emblem Pro tags are their own character, Ike, Sigurd, etc., or are closer to being silent/blank slates like Byleth, Robin, Corrin to lesser degrees, to act as medium for the player? I prefer protagonists who are their own character 1000%. I don't think you need an avatar character to facilitate branching paths or multiple endings or anything like that. How is life treating you? I hope all is well. If you could choose a story as a baseline for a future sequel or standalone game from any of the existing games, what would it be? Like, for instance, how Radiant Dawn was a sequel and expansion of the world and events of Path of Radiance, or how Three Hopes was an alternate reality for Fodlan. And lastly, if you could design an entirely unique class, what would it be? What weapons would it use, and what would generally be its best stat? Things are definitely going better for me. I'll answer the last question because I already kind of answered the initial one earlier. For a unique class, maybe some kind of AoE caster class that deals exclusively in AoE healing or damage, or utility staff class that deals specifically in ally and enemy buffs and debuffs respectively. I love unique classes that can help push player phase and creativity, and of course I think they should have a really good magic stat. With the possibility of new characters that may show up in a future remake of Binding Blade Genealogy of the Holy War 3776, would you like them to continue the trend of OCs that can catch players who play the original game off game? As long as they're well done, I think is the biggest thing. Gaiden's story was really bare bones, and the OCs and reimaginings of characters really bolstered the game's staying power and memory. The games you mentioned have a fleshed out story already, FE6 not as much, so I think that game can do some good characterization injection. If you were to add or remove a mechanic from any Fire Emblem game, what would it be and why? Could be a controversial take, but I think hub worlds should be removed or at least definitely toned down. The problem I've had with this is that loading screen gating, useful unit progression mechanics that you need to deal with for the entire campaign is monotonous and boring and slow, and in my opinion hurts replay value. I made a whole last video about this, and I still think it's true. Did you watch the Guts vs Dimitri death battle? If so, what are your thoughts about it? Also, do you have any suggestions for matches with other Fire Emblem characters? I'm partial to Marth versus Aragorn. That was really fun. I don't know how death battle actually measures characters at their peak. Dimitri using magic was quite funny. I thought applying Dimitri's skills like seal movement was interesting, but the power measurements using Rhea's defeat at the hands of Edelgard and Byleth as like its baseline was kind of strange to me, and I remember watching it and thinking, wait, this doesn't work, does it? But the animation and the ending seemed really cool though. Will this is what happens in Fire Emblem Return? Unfortunately, I don't think it will. If you had the choice to add another character from Fire Emblem into Super Smash Bros., who would it be and why? Disregard the precedent set of only main protagonists and traditionally infantry units. If you could add a villain, a side character, a mounted unit, Arden, and anyone, also ignore the fact that it would probably set the internet on fire again, like when Byleth got added. I've actually always wanted the Black Knight to be a character. He's an iconic villain, he already has a assist trophy, and I think he just have a really unique place as an extremely mobile heavyweight swordy who could teleport and have a good disadvantage state, and a counter, and, you know, just sounding broken and fast and heavy. I think, you know, he's the Black Knight. I think you should have him. I think he'd be a great character to add. We need to have a Fire Emblem character who's like top 5. What kind of new, unique mechanic would you like to see in the next mainline FE release? As for a new mechanic, I don't know about all that, but bring back capture though. I say this every single time someone asks me about mechanics coming back, and I think Fate's capture was so good. Do you think we will get one more Fire Emblem game on the Switch? I genuinely don't think so. What is your top 5 favorite relationships, not just siblings, amongst all the games? Personally, I will always love the dynamic between Tamara and Fogado. Okay, like canon relationships or siblings, I'll do my best here. Clive Matilda, Hector Lynn, me and Avel, Hilda Holst for siblings, and Nezala and Leanne for another relationship that I really liked. If there were to be a remake of FE7, what things would you like to be changed or added, and would you like a tactician to have more of a character? I think Mark is perfectly fine the way they are. As for things to be changed, it's a really good question. I don't think the supports need a lot of work. I definitely think the support grinding system should be improved into something that's kind of more attuned to like modern Fire Emblem, like post-awakening type thing. I would have to really sit on that question. I don't think I actually read this part of the question when I was actually writing these questions down, but I think I might want to answer that question in another video altogether, because that would be kind of cool to explore what they would have to improve on. Refining the ranked runs, making supports easier to grind, and I think those would be like the major two. Probably like revamping magic in some way, because FE7's magic triangle was really bad. The magic was extremely unbalanced. Like dark magic was pretty much just one spell the entire game. Light magic was just dreadfully bad, and anima dominated like crazy. So I think rebalancing magic, rebalancing how ranked runs go, and then the third thing I said, I think that's a good start. I think Lynn would be included more in the main story if it did get remade, just because Lynn's so popular, but yeah. Do you have an idea as to why it is now seemingly popular to hate on Three Houses? I feel like I'm being being gaslit into thinking Three Houses is a bad game, lol. I've honestly not seen anything about this, so you'll need to elaborate. What other characters would you have wished were made playable in Three Hopes, like Rodrigue, Monica, and Holst, I mean? Definitely let the characters from Three Houses be playable. I'd also have liked it if you could play as the kids' dads like Caspar's and Linhart's, that kind of thing. Getting more backstory on characters that go completely unseen in the original would have been really nice. Why did Engage just steal ideas from TMS? You are barking up the wrong tree. Not really a question, but I'd love to see you bring back This Is What Happens in Fire Emblem game title, and like I said before, don't hedge your bets on it. Who is a character that you once disliked or didn't think much of at first, but over time you actually grew to enjoy, either because of your own changing opinion or because a different piece of Fire Emblem media, Heroes, Wars, etc. did something to make that character seem more appealing to you? Also, is there any character that has done the opposite for you, started out liking, but over time started disliking? I answered the first question earlier, but this is a really interesting question to me, so I honestly might make this into a full-on video, but I don't think there's a character that I used to like and then just don't like anymore. Do you enjoy other tactics games besides FE such as XCOM? I have never played XCOM before, but I really enjoyed Lost Eidolons, that indie game that I talked about in a whole last video I made, and I was quite happy that it did well. The gameplay was really fun, and if you're a Three Houses fan, I really recommend it. I've been meaning to get back into that, but that and many other games are in the backlog right now. Dorothea is my favorite Fire Emblem character. What are your thoughts on her both as a unit and a character? I thought Dorothea was great. I don't really remember much about her supports, but as a character, I always found her charming and very fun with that patented Fire Emblem Three Houses sad backstory. As a unit, I don't really remember her being too memorable though. I think I benched her, honestly. When you think of underrated Fire Emblem characters, who comes to mind? From a writing perspective, it's hard to say, and it kind of depends on how you define underrated. I feel like a lot of people conflate underrated with overlooked sometimes. Like a lot of old generation Fire Emblem games have characters that the majority has absolutely not looked into, even to make a decision on if they like them or not. But for recent games with all their characters seen, I think Cyril and Linden come to mind. Best Lord trio in all Fire Emblem. That's a good question, but if we're talking lords, the Three Houses trio is pretty hard to contend with. Then you have the iconic trio of old from 20 years ago, Eliwood, Hector, and Lyn. What features would you keep from previous entries if you were to plan a next FE entry? What systems would you change, and how would you change them? Like I said before, and before that, capture. As far as changing systems goes, I think I'd have something done about hub areas, honestly. I already talked about this before, but you know, some of these questions kind of get asked in different ways, and they kind of are presented differently, so sometimes I provide a different answer to a similar question. Like I mentioned earlier, I really don't think it's a good idea to make hub areas mandatory in any way. They should be optional things to enrich the character/world experience, but that should be the player's choice. So the very important things like forging and ring chamber stuff in Engage, in my opinion, should have been on overworld menus too. That's a big thing I'd change. Well, folks, that's going to be it for this Ask Ghast. Thank you so much for all of your support on my channel lately. I know I've been pretty inactive, but I've been really busy offline working as a personal trainer. And yeah, I just really appreciate everyone's support still. I'm thinking about writing some more editorial type videos about FE4 and just kind of Fire Emblem topics that seemed interesting to me, especially those questions that I found pretty interesting and might be worth making a full-on video for. Besides that, I've just been kind of chilling. Thank you so much for looking out for me and all that good stuff. And I'll see you in the next one. Deuces.